India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's address in Summit of the Future at the United Nations will be the main highlight on day 3 of his US visit. The world leaders are expected to deliberate on course correction to make sustainable development for all a reality. DD India's Shubhendu Ghosh brings us more from New York.
On day 3 of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United States, focus would be on the Summit of the Future at the United Nations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will present India's vision on sustainable tomorrow. At the heart of the summit lies the idea that 21st century challenges require 21st century solutions. It is a recognition that the world has fallen behind in meeting its targets, from sustainable development goals to mitigating climate change. Global institutions have failed to evolve and reform. Regional conflicts threaten global peace. Earlier on Sunday, UN General Assembly adopted a pact for the future, which the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described as a landmark agreement that is a step change towards more effective, inclusive and network multilateralism. The pact covers themes including peace and security, global governance, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, human rights, gender, youth and future generations. Given how failed development targets disproportionately impact poor and developing countries, all eyes will be on how Prime Minister Modi articulates the concerns of the Global South. Shubhendu Ghosh for DD India in New York.
And DD India's Shubhendu Ghosh joins us from New York. Shubhendu, so just to take a cue from your recent report, so all eyes are going to be set on Prime Minister Modi's address at the summit and what India really brings to the summit table. Over to you.
Absolutely, Sakal. Good morning from outside of the United Nations headquarters in New York. All eyes are on Prime Minister's address at the Summit of the Future. Given that the disproportionate impact that the developing countries, the poorer countries, that the countries of the Global South have to face, in that context, what India has to say at the summit becomes hugely significant. The whole idea of the summit came into being because various important targets, whether we talk about sustainable development goals, whether we talk about climate mitigation, whether it is about ensuring peace and security across the world in the context of the regional conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, as they rage on, or it is simply about the reform, the much needed reforms of multinational institutions that have not taken place in the timeline that had been promised. And therefore, the summit comes at a time when global leaders must come together and rethink about the manner in which they want to proceed into the future together. And therefore, India's perspective, Prime Minister's address becomes hugely significant. How does the Global South look at these developments, given that it is so vulnerable to the outcome of these deliberations?
There's a lot of conversations as a lead up to the summit today. The reforms of the multilateral institutions, particularly the UNSC and India's candidature, and many feel, we've been discussing this in our studios as well. Now is the time for India.
Absolutely. The whole driving idea, Sakal, here is that the 21st century problems must find 21st century solutions. An organization, a structure that took shape some 75 years ago cannot be expected to address in an efficient manner, in an equitable manner, the challenges of the present. And therefore, the reform of the multinational institutions, the UNSC in particular, is of great significance. And the call has been made very loudly, very continuously by nations like India and other countries who would like an equal stake in the decision making when they have an equal stake in every other aspect of the world politics and global development. And therefore, all eyes are on whether and what kind of movement can the United Nations make towards this reform. One understands that these reforms don't happen overnight, but the time lapse that has happened in the period is much longer than an overnight decision. So it's much pending. And therefore, the pressure is also growing on the United Nations and the UNSC to reinvent itself. And if it does not, it does run the risk of becoming obsolete.
Absolutely. And a bit on the India putting also at the stage the main concerns and the challenges confronting the Global South, because, the way India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has been seen as a crusader or a leader, leading from the front when it comes to Global South grouping.
Absolutely, Sakal. And we just look at an example of climate change mitigation. The impacts of it, the adverse impacts of it, can be seen in every part of the world, whether you're in India, whether you're in the United States, in the Caribbean, in South America, Africa, Europe, anywhere. Extreme weather conditions are threatening global order everywhere. But now let us look at the way in which global south becomes more vulnerable than perhaps the rest of the world. The Pacific Islands in particular run the risk of drowning in the rising seawater. It doesn't get worse than that. It's a very existential threat, the manner in which climate change calamity is impacting the global south. This is just one example. All these development aspects, SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, by 2030, the international community, world as a whole, were supposed to achieve certain standard goals for the world order in the realm of, say, drinking water, in the realm of access to education, in the realm of access to infrastructure, basic infrastructure for ease of living. But it has not materialized for the developing countries. It has not materialized for the poorer countries. There was a responsibility that the developed country had towards these issues. In climate change, there was a promise of funding of $100 billion a year. There was a promise of transfer of technology. All those promises have not been kept, and therefore, this summit is taking place, and therefore a country like India must, in clear words, assert the rights of the global south and climate justice and justice in possibly every aspect of global politics.
The timings of the summit is also very crucial. We're talking about prevention of arms race and what's happening around the world, the Western War Theatre and much more. So in that sense, what India speaks is going to be very crucial, because there's also this whole narrative of India assuming the role of peacemaker under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the way we've seen this bilateral has shaped up and the recently concluded Quad summit there, you know.
That's right, Sakal. In the context of the conflicts that are raging on, just for example, what is happening in Ukraine for more than a couple of years, in Gaza. Now, India is often seen as the country which advocates the stand in favor of peace. It refuses to take sides. It says it is more important to work towards peace, whatever it takes. Not just because it is important to restore peace in the region, but the kind of cascading impact any regional conflict has on the global order and the global south in particular. The Ukraine conflict, with all the adversity that people in Ukraine, Russia have had to face in all these years, the impact of it is also felt in the form of food security, for example, in African countries. Now, African countries, therefore, want a resolution at the earliest. Similarly, global conflicts have that kind of far-reaching impact and more adversely as far as the countries of the global south are concerned. And therefore, it becomes hugely significant to look at these conflicts, look at these developments in the larger picture, something that India has been doing. India's advocacy of peace has not just been for peace per se, but peace which is going to be used as an agent, as a catalyst for development, for security of the global south. In that sense, again, India's perspective becomes very significant.
All right, now we can say it's just a matter of few hours when India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be addressing that APEC summit. Many thanks, Shubhendu Ghosh. That's all we have time for you, at least in this broadcast. Of course, we'll get back to you later on our special show at around 9 p.m. But thank you very much for joining us from New York and outside UN headquarters.